You have 24 hours to vacate this property. The woman's voice cut through the mountain air like a blade. I stood there, hammer in hand, staring at three strangers in matching HOA polo shirts who'd just walked into my house without knocking. The one in front wore a navy blazer and wielded her clipboard like a warrant. I'd owned this place for 9 days, bought it for $5 at a county tax auction, with all the paperwork sitting in my glove box. Apparently, none of that mattered to them. Before I explain how this ended, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I ended up on that mountain in the first place, standing in a house that smelled like 150 years of silence and pine resin. 7 months before that woman walked through my door, I was sitting in a hospital room watching my wife die. Nora had been an editor for architectural history books, the kind of person who could spend 3 hours talking about the difference between Queen Anne and Victorian gingerbread trim. She loved old buildings the way some people love music. In her last weeks, when the morphine made her words slow and careful, she'd grip my hand and talk about a dream she had. A house on a mountain. Somewhere the morning light came through Douglas fir beams and made the whole structure glow like amber. She wanted to see something like that restored. I wanted to witness wood and stone brought back from the edge of collapse. I promised her I'd find it. 3 weeks later, she was gone. I spent the next 6 months in a fog. I'm a freelance architectural historian, which means I get hired to research old buildings, document their origins, and verify claims for historical registries. It's detective work with blueprints and deed records. After Nora passed, I couldn't focus. Every project felt hollow. Every structure I documented just reminded me that time wins and nothing stays solid. Then one afternoon in late spring, I was scrolling through county auction listings, not really looking for anything, just filling time. That's when I saw it. A 150-year-old mountain house, tax foreclosure sale, minimum bid $5. The listing had 2 photos. Both showed a structure that looked more like a skeleton than a building. Walls sagging. The roof is half gone. Windows empty as eye sockets. But I recognized the framing in one of the shots. Douglas fir, old growth, the kind of timber you can't find anymore. I clicked through to the property records and felt something shift in my chest. 1875, built by a miner named Jasper Dalton, 3.2 acres. I put in my bid that night, $5. Nobody else bid against me. 2 weeks later, I drove up the mountain access road with the deed paperwork in my glove box and a toolbox rattling in the truck bed. The GPS signal died a mile before I reached the property line. I had to navigate by the old survey map I'd printed from the county records office. When I finally pulled up to the clearing, the sun was just starting to rise. The house sat there like something out of a fever dream, tilted moss-covered, yet alive in the morning light. The sun slipped through the broken roof beams, catching the Douglas fir frame in gold and shadow. For the first time in 7 months, I felt something stir inside me. Purpose. I walked up the sagging porch steps, testing each board with my weight before committing. The front door hung open on one hinge. Inside, the floor creaked like it was deciding whether to hold me, but the bones of the place were solid. The main support beams were intact. The stone fireplace in the center room stood firm hand-cut granite blocks fitted so tight you couldn't slide a knife blade between them. I moved through the space slowly, taking photos, making notes in my field journal. There was a root cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen corner. I always check basements and crawl spaces first when documenting old structures. That's where you find the truth of a building, the original foundation work, the evidence of how it was really constructed. I pulled the trapdoor open and climbed down the wooden ladder using my phone flashlight to scan the space. That's where I found the tin box. It was shoved into a gap between 2 foundation stones, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly rotted away. Inside were papers, the original land patent, 1875, signed by the Commissioner of the General Land Office, a hand-drawn survey map showing the exact boundaries, 3.2 acres, and the federal deed itself stamped with the eagle seal of the United States government. I knew what I was looking at. This wasn't just a property deed. This was a land patent, federal grant, the kind of title that supersedes everything that came after it. I photographed every page, stored the originals in a waterproof document case I kept in my truck. Then I went back inside and started working. I spent the next 9 days cleaning debris, shoring up the weakest sections of floor, replacing broken window glass with salvaged panes I found at a reclamation yard 2 towns over. Every morning I arrived at dawn, Every evening, I worked until the light failed. It was the first time since Nora died that I felt like I was building something, instead of just documenting decay. Not because the house was worth anything financially. The county had listed it for $5 because nobody wanted it, but because it was a piece of history that deserved to survive. Because someone 150 years ago had built this place with their hands, had lived here, had looked out these same windows at the same mountains. And because Nora would have loved it. On the 9th day, I was measuring a window frame for replacement glass when I heard the vehicle pull up outside. I assumed it was a neighbor, maybe someone curious about the work trucks they'd seen coming and going. I walked to the door, still holding my tape measure. That's when I saw her. Navy blazer, clipboard, 2 people in matching polo shirts behind her. The shirts had a logo, Maplewood Heights, HOA. She looked at me like I was something she needed to scrape off her shoe. Then she opened her mouth and said the words that would change everything. "This land belongs to the homeowners association." I just stood there, sawdust on my hands, trying to process what I was hearing. She kept talking, told me the house violated 14 covenant violations, told me I needed to remove all structures and vacate immediately, told me if I didn't comply, she'd have me arrested for trespassing. I asked her name. Claudia Pemberton, president of the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association, 12 years running. She said it like she expected me to recognize the title, like it carried weight. I pulled the deed from my back pocket, showed her the county auction paperwork. She barely glanced at it. "Tax auction sales don't override HOA jurisdiction," she said. "This land has been under our management since 1998. I looked at the deed in my hand. 1875. I looked back at her. "I think there's been a mistake," I said. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "The only mistake here is yours," she said. "You have 24 hours to clear out. After that, we're calling the sheriff and having you removed for criminal trespassing." Then she turned and walked back to her vehicle. I stood in the doorway, watching them drive away, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't know it yet, but that piece of paper in my hand, that federal land patent from 1875, was about to become the most important weapon in the longest legal fight of my life. That night, I sat in the house with my laptop and a battery-powered work light, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The county deed was clear. I'd purchased the property legally at a tax foreclosure auction. The paperwork was stamped, notarized, recorded. But Claudia Pemberton had spoken with the kind of certainty that comes from years of unchallenged authority. 24 hours. She'd given me 24 hours to abandon a property I legally owned. I pulled up a search engine and typed in Maplewood Heights HOA. What I found made my stomach drop. Page after page of 1-star reviews, complaints about arbitrary fines, threats of legal action over paint colors that were 2 shades off approved palettes. One homeowner had been forced to repaint their house 3 times. Another had been fined $500 for leaving trash cans visible for more than 4 hours. The phrase that kept appearing was the same. Claudia Pemberton, president for 12 years, no elections, no challengers, just her year after year tightening the screws. I closed the laptop and looked around the dark house. The work light cast long shadows across the exposed beams. I'd spent 9 days here feeling like I was finally doing something that mattered. Now I was sitting in the middle of someone else's territory dispute. I thought about Nora, about the promise I'd made to her. I wasn't going to let some homeowners association president take this away, not without a fight. But I also wasn't stupid. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I needed to know the law. So I did what any architectural historian would do. I started researching. The next morning I drove to the county law library. It was a small building attached to the courthouse filled with dusty reference books and outdated computers. I spent 3 hours pulling case law on property rights homeowners associations and something I'd never heard of before called land patents. What I learned changed everything. Lenora read the document, then looked up. "This isn't just a deed, Owen. It's a federal land patent paramount title. That means the HOA has 0 jurisdiction here." I made copies of everything, 15 pages of case law and statutory references. Then I called someone I should have called the day Nora died, Lenora Briggs. She'd been Nora's friend for 20 years, a real estate attorney who specialized in historical property disputes. 69 years old, semi-retired, and one of the sharpest legal minds I'd ever met. When I explained what had happened on the mountain, she listened without interrupting. Then she said, Come to my office. Bring every document you have. We're going to sort this out. The next morning, exactly 24 hours after Claudia's ultimatum, I heard vehicles pulling up, multiple engines. I looked out and saw a sheriff's cruiser, Claudia's SUV, and 2 pickup trucks with HOA logos. My heart kicked into high gear. I walked outside, still holding my hammer. Sheriff Dale Merrick got out of the cruiser first. 50s weathered face, the kind of cop who'd spent decades dealing with small-town disputes. Claudia stepped out next, that same cold smile. Behind her came 4 people in matching polo shirts carrying cameras and clipboards. "Sheriff, what's this about?" I said, keeping my voice steady. Merrick looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Fairchild, I got a call about a trespassing situation. Ms. Pemberton claims you're occupying HOA property without authorization." I pulled the deed from my back pocket. I'd started carrying it everywhere. "Sheriff, I own this land. Purchased it legally at a county tax auction. Here's the documentation." Merrick took the papers, looked them over. Claudia stepped forward. "That auction was invalid. This property falls under HOA jurisdiction." I pulled out the land patent, the original from the tin box, now in a clear archival sleeve. "This is a federal land grant from 1875, signed by the Commissioner of the General Land Office. Federal law says this supersedes any local covenants." Claudia's smile faltered, just for a second. "That's just an old piece of paper. It has no legal standing." Merrick was still looking at the documents. He glanced between them, then looked at Claudia. "Ma'am, these look legitimate. Mr. Fairchild has proof of ownership through the county. If you have a dispute about jurisdiction, that's a civil matter. Take it up in court." Claudia's face went red. "Sheriff, this man is destroying community property without permits." Merrick held up a hand. "Ma'am, unless he's breaking a criminal law, there's nothing I can do. This is a property dispute. File in civil court." He handed my documents back. "Mr. Fairchild, you're free to continue your work. Just follow county building codes." Then he got back in his cruiser and left. I stood there watching Claudia's face as the sheriff drove away. Her smile was completely gone. She looked at me with something close to hatred. "This isn't over. You think you can just come up here and do whatever you want? You're going to regret this." One of the polo shirt people stepped forward. "Should we proceed with site documentation?" She nodded. They walked the property line, taking photos, writing notes, measuring distances. After 20 minutes, they got back in their trucks. Claudia was the last to go. She rolled down her window. 24 hours was generous. You should have taken the offer. Then she drove away, kicking up dust. I drove straight to Lenora's office. It was a small practice in a converted Victorian house 2 towns over. She met me at the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. "Nora told me about the Mountain House dream. I'm glad you found it." Then she sat me down and went through every document: the federal deed, the survey map, the county auction paperwork. When she got to the land patent, she stopped, put on her reading glasses, studied it for a full minute. "This is legitimate, 1875, signed by the Commissioner of the General Land Office. This isn't just a deed, Owen. This is constitutional-level property protection. The HOA has no jurisdiction here, none." She looked up at me. "The sheriff established that you have legal standing. That's important. But this woman isn't going to stop. She's going to escalate." I told her about the threats, the cameras they'd brought, the way Claudia had looked at me. Lenora leaned back in her chair. "You need to document everything from this point forward. Every interaction, every threat. Get security cameras. Record everything. When this goes to court, and it will, we're going to need proof they've been harassing you." That afternoon, I bought 4 wireless security cameras, motion activated, night vision, cloud storage backup. I installed them that evening, 1 covering the front approach, 1 on the back, 2 covering the side property lines. If Claudia came back, I'd have proof. 3 nights later, around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and froze. 2 figures moved across the property: Claudia and a man I didn't know, mid-50s, expensive jacket, flashlight in hand. They circled the foundation, scanning with a laser. I switched on the audio feed. "The survey confirms it," the man said. "Gemstone deposit runs right under this section. 3 million, maybe more." "And he doesn't know?" Claudia asked. "He bought it for $5. I think it's just an old house." "So, we just need to get him out," she said. "Russell, can your company move once the title's clear? The moment you say go." Every word was recorded. Every frame is caught in the infrared. When they left, I sat staring at the footage, the truth crashing in. This was never about covenants or paint colors, it was greed. I sent the file to Lenora. We need to talk. Now. Her reply came 2 minutes later. My office, 8 a.m. Bring everything. I didn't sleep. Just watched the video loop, knowing at last what Claudia was really fighting for and what I'd be fighting against. I walked into Lenora's office at 8 a.m. sharp with my laptop, the security camera footage queued up and ready. She was already at her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, a yellow legal pad covered in notes spread out in front of her. She looked up when I came in, and I could see the determination in her eyes. "Show me," she said. I opened the laptop, connected it to her monitor, and played the footage. We watched in silence as Claudia and the man she'd called Russell moved across my property in the infrared glow. When his voice came through talking about the $3 million gemstone deposit, Lenora leaned forward. When Claudia asked about clearing the title so his development company could move in, Lenora's jaw tightened. The footage ran for 6 minutes. When it ended, she sat back and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "This changes everything. This isn't a property dispute anymore. This is a conspiracy to commit fraud, possibly theft, and we have it all on tape." She pulled the legal pad closer and started writing. "Here's what we know. Claudia Pemberton has been president of the Maplewood Heights HOA for 12 years. She claims your land falls under HOA jurisdiction, despite having zero legal basis for that claim. She's threatened you with eviction, called the sheriff on false pretenses, and now we have evidence that she's working with a real estate developer to force you off land that contains valuable mineral deposits." She turned to her computer and pulled up a database. "I'm going to do some research on this Russell character. If he's a developer working with Claudia, there's got to be a paper trail." She typed for a few minutes, then stopped. "Russell Kingsley, owner of Kingsley Development Corporation, based 2 counties over. And look at this." She turned the screen toward me. It showed a list of property transactions going back 5 years. 7 properties in the Maplewood Heights area, all purchased through foreclosure or forced sale, all sold to Kingsley Development within 6 months of the HOA filing complaints against the previous owners. I felt my stomach drop. "She's done this before." Lenora nodded. "Multiple times. She targets properties, manufactures, violations, pressures the owners until they give up and sell cheap, then flips them to Kingsley at a markup. It's a system. And from the looks of it, a very profitable one." She printed out the transaction records and added them to a growing file folder. "We need to talk to those previous owners, find out if their stories match the pattern. If we can prove this is an ongoing scheme, we're not just looking at fraud, we're looking at racketeering." I sat there trying to process it all. 7 properties, 7 families who'd been forced out of their homes by fake HOA violations and legal threats. "How do we find them?" I asked. Lenora smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been practicing law for 40 years and knew exactly how to dig up buried information. "Leave that to me." Over the next week, I did exactly what Lenora told me to do. I went back to the house every day and kept working. I replaced more windows. I reinforced the foundation supports. I documented everything with photos and detailed notes. And I watched the security camera feeds like a hawk. Claudia didn't come back, but I noticed other things. Cars slowing down on the access road, people taking photos from the tree line. Once a drone flew over the property. I recorded all of it. Meanwhile, Lenora was building our case. She tracked down 4 of the 7 previous property owners. Their stories were almost identical to mine. HOA violations that appeared out of nowhere, threats of legal action, pressure campaigns that included surprise inspections, fabricated complaints, and escalating fines. In every case, the owners had eventually given up and sold. In every case, Kingsley Development had been the buyer. Lenora compiled it all into a binder that was growing thicker by the day. Case law, property records, transaction histories, witness statements. "When we go to court," she said, "this is going to be Exhibit A through Z." But Claudia wasn't sitting still either. 2 weeks after the sheriff's visit, I received another letter. This one was from an attorney. The letterhead was embossed, expensive looking. The content was anything but friendly. It was a formal cease and desist letter, 3 pages long, single-spaced. It claimed I was in violation of 18 separate HOA covenants. Unauthorized construction, environmental damage, noise pollution, failure to submit architectural plans, failure to pay HOA dues. Each violation carried a specific fine. The total came to $45,000. The letter demanded immediate payment and cessation of all work. It threatened legal action, including property seizure, if I didn't comply within 30 days. I scanned the letter and sent it to Lenora. She called me back within an hour. This is exactly what I expected. They're trying to bury you in legal fees and paperwork, force you into a position where fighting back costs more than just walking away. But here's the thing, Owen. Every single violation they've listed is based on the assumption that the HOA has jurisdiction over your property. They don't. This letter is worthless. So, what do I do? I asked. Nothing. You don't respond. You don't engage. You definitely don't pay them a single cent. We're not playing their game. We're building our own case, and when it's ready, we're going to hit them so hard they won't know what happened. I wanted to believe her, but sitting there looking at that letter, with its $45,000 demand, I felt the weight of it all pressing down. Lenora must have heard something in my silence, because her voice softened. Owen, listen to me. I know this is scary, but you have something they don't have. You have the truth. You have federal law on your side, and you have me. I'm not charging you a cent for this. Nora was my friend. This is for her. I felt my throat tighten. Thank you, I managed to say. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when Claudia Pemberton is standing in front of a judge trying to explain why she's been running a criminal enterprise for the past 5 years. That night, I drove back up to the house. It was late, almost midnight. The mountain was dark except for the stars and a thin crescent moon. I parked and sat there for a while, just looking at the structure. It was starting to take shape. The windows were in, the roof was patched, the floor was solid. In the moonlight, it almost looked like it had 150 years ago when Jasper Dalton first built it. I thought about him, a miner who had spent his days underground pulling ore from the earth, who'd come home to this house he'd built with his own hands. I thought about Nora, about how she would have loved seeing this place come back to life. And I thought about Claudia Pemberton sitting somewhere in her comfortable house, planning her next move, convinced that money and power and 12 years of unchallenged authority made her untouchable. She was wrong. I got out of the truck and walked up to the house, pulled out my phone and took a photo of the front facade, the moonlight casting it in silver and shadow. Then I sent it to Lenora with a message. Still standing, still fighting. Her response came back a minute later. Good, because we're just getting started. I stood there on that mountain, looking at the house I'd bought for $5 and made a promise, not to Nora this time, to myself. I wasn't going anywhere. This land was mine, and I wasn't going anywhere, not after everything it had survived. Let Claudia bring everything she had. I was ready. Claudia's next move came faster than I expected. 3 days after I received the cease and desist letter, I woke up to notifications flooding my phone. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Emails from people I'd never met. All of them were angry. All of them accused me of destroying their community. Someone had created a social media group. Save Our Maplewood Community. The profile photo was a picture of my house taken from the worst possible angle. The roof damage looked catastrophic. The debris I'd been clearing was piled in ugly heaps. The caption read, "Out-of-state investor buys historic land for pennies, plans to demolish and develop, destroying our mountain heritage and property values." The post had been shared 300 times in less than 24 hours. I scrolled through the comments. They were brutal. Who does this guy think he is? Someone needs to run him out of town. Our homes are losing value because of this eyesore. The lies were spreading faster than I could track them. And at the center of it all, posting comments and fanning the flames, was Claudia. She never said anything directly actionable, just questions that planted seeds. Has anyone verified his permits? I wonder if the county knows about the environmental damage. I felt sick. This wasn't just a legal attack anymore. This was a character assassination. And it was working. That morning when I drove up to the house, the neighbors who used to wave now turned away. One man who'd always smiled actually glared at me. A woman walking her dog crossed to the other side of the road when she saw my truck. I'd become the villain in a story I didn't even recognize. The following week, Claudia called an emergency HOA meeting. The notice said critical community issues requiring immediate action. Lenora told me to attend and record everything. I arrived early. The parking lot was packed. Inside, every head turned as I walked in. Claudia sat at the front with 2 board members and a man in an expensive suit, her attorney. I took a seat in the back and started recording. At 7 sharp, Claudia began. "Thank you for coming." Her voice filled the room, confident and rehearsed. The first slide behind her showed my house, the same unflattering photo from the social media post. This property within our HOA boundaries was purchased by an outsider. He's violated multiple regulations and refused all communication. She moved to another slide, a list of 18 supposed violations. These pose a threat to community standards. We propose to reclaim the property for community use and compensate Mr. Fairchild $10,000. Applause broke out. My pulse was hammered. I stayed silent recording. Then a voice cut through the noise. "How can the HOA claim eminent domain over land that was never part of the association?" An older woman stood near the back, a folder in hand. "I was on the founding board in '98. That property was never included in our charter." She held up the document. "I have the original right here." Claudia froze. "The boundaries were updated in 2003. "No, they weren't." The woman interrupted. "I was there. No boundary changes were ever approved." The room buzzed. "So, why are we voting to seize property that doesn't even belong to the HOA?" The room started to buzz with conversation. Claudia stood up, her face flushing red. "This meeting is about community protection, not ancient paperwork." Ancient paperwork, the HOA charter, is a legal document. If you're claiming jurisdiction over property that isn't actually under HOA control, that's fraud. The word hung in the air like a bomb. I could see Claudia struggling to regain control. Her attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She nodded. "Perhaps we should table this discussion until the legal boundaries can be properly verified." "I don't think we should table anything," I said, standing up. Every head in the room swiveled toward me. I pulled out my phone, pulled up the land patent photo, and held it up. "My name is Owen Fairchild. I'm the person you've been talking about, and I'd like to clear up a few things." I walked down the aisle toward the front. "First, I didn't buy this property to develop it. I bought it to restore it. It's a 150-year-old historical structure built by a miner named Jasper Dalton. Second, I'm not violating any HOA covenants because this property isn't part of the HOA. It never was." I held up my phone higher. "This is a federal land patent from 1875. It grants paramount title, which supersedes any local jurisdiction. The HOA has no authority over my land. None. Third, I've never refused communication. I've been threatened, harassed, and had the sheriff called on me for doing legal work on property I legally own. So, before you vote on anything, maybe you should ask your president why she's so desperate to get me off that land, and why a real estate developer named Russell Kingsley keeps showing up at 2 in the morning to talk about gemstone deposits." The room exploded. Everyone started talking at once. Claudia was on her feet, shouting that I was making false accusations. Her attorney was trying to restore order. The older woman was demanding answers. After 5 minutes of chaos, Claudia grabbed her things and walked out. Her attorney followed. The meeting dissolved into dozens of smaller arguments. I found the older woman near the exit. "Thank you," I said. She looked at me with sharp eyes. "I've watched that woman bully people for 12 years. It's about time someone stood up to her." She handed me her folder. "You might need this. Original HOA documents, boundary maps, meeting minutes, everything that proves she's lying." I took the folder like it was made of gold. "Why are you helping me?" She smiled sadly. "Because 3 years ago, Claudia did the same thing to me. Manufactured violations, threatened legal action. I ended up selling 2 acres of family land just to make her stop. I found out later she sold it to a development company for 10 times what I got. I've been waiting for someone to fight back." She patted my arm. "Give her hell." I drove straight to Lenora's office even though it was almost 9 p.m. She was still there working late. I handed her the folder and told her everything that had happened at the meeting. She went through the few documents with increasing intensity. When she finished, she looked up at me. "Owen, this is smoking gun evidence. The original HOA charter clearly excludes your property. Every claim Claudia has made about jurisdiction is provably false. And now we have a witness who's willing to testify about the pattern of fraud." She leaned back in her chair. "Document everything." So I did 4 cameras motion activated covering every angle. The next morning, Lenora and I drove 3 hours to the Bureau of Land Management office. It was housed in a nondescript federal building in the state capitol, the kind of place that smelled like old files and government coffee. We'd made an appointment with a land records specialist, someone Lenora knew from a previous case. His name was on a placard outside his office. Records Division. We were shown into a small room lined with filing cabinets and computer terminals. The specialist was in his 60s, gray hair, reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He shook our hands and gestured for us to sit. "Lenora said you have a land patent issue," he said. "Those don't come across my desk very often anymore." I pulled out the tin box, opened it carefully, and removed the land patent still in its protective sleeve. He took it, put on his reading glasses, and studied it for a long moment. Then he turned to his computer and started typing. "Land patent number 4471, he said, reading from the document. "Issued June 12, 1875 to Jasper Dalton, 3.2 acres. Let me pull up the Federal Registry." He typed for another minute, then nodded. "Here it is. Still active. Never superseded, never voided, never challenged. This is what we call a perfected patent. Once the federal government issues one of these, it creates an irreversible chain of titles." He looked at me over his glasses. "Mr. Fairchild, do you understand what you have here?" I nodded slowly. "Paramount title, the highest form of property ownership." He smiled. "Exactly. This document predates statehood, it predates county jurisdiction, it predates every local ordinance and regulation that exists today. Under federal law, specifically Title 43 of the United States Code Section 1068, this patent is conclusive evidence of title. No HOA, no local government, no state entity can override it." Lenora leaned forward. "Can you provide us with a certified copy, something we can use in federal court?" He nodded. "Absolutely. I can print a certified true copy right now with the federal seal and my signature as the custodian of records. It'll hold up in any court in the country." He turned back to his computer and started the process. While the printer warmed up, he kept talking. "You know, I've been doing this job for 32 years. I've seen a lot of land patent cases. Most of them involve mining claims or water rights, but every once in a while someone discovers they own land that other people assumed was up for grabs. The law is very clear on this. The Constitution gives the federal government exclusive authority to dispose of public lands. When they issue a patent, that's it. It's done. Nobody can undo it." The printer started spitting out pages. Official letterhead, federal seals, dense legal text. He collected them, stamped each page with an embossed seal signed at the bottom, and handed them to Lenora. "This is your evidence. Guard it carefully." We walked out of that building with a stack of papers that felt like they weighed 100 pounds. In the parking lot, Lenora turned to me. "Owen, what we have now is more than just a property dispute defense. We have constitutional protection. The 14th Amendment guarantees due process. Nobody can deprive you of property without due process of law. Claudia tried to do exactly that. She threatened you, harassed you, and attempted to seize your land without any legal authority. That's not just fraud. That's a federal civil rights violation under Title 42, Section 1983. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a legal pad, started writing while standing there in the parking lot. "Here's what we're going to do. We're filing in federal district court. We're naming Claudia Pemberton personally, the HOA as an entity, every board member who participated in that meeting, and Russell Kingsley. We're alleging conspiracy to deprive civil rights, fraud, trespass, and harassment. And we're asking for damages, attorney's fees, and injunctive relief." I watched her write, barely able to process it all. "How strong is the case?" She looked up at me. "With what we have. The land patent, the security footage, the testimony from the previous victims, the fake HOA charter, the meeting recording. Owen, this is the strongest case I've built in 20 years. They have no defense. None. The only question is how much this is going to cost them." We drove back to her office and spent the rest of the day drafting the complaint. Lenora worked with the precision of a surgeon. Every claim was supported by evidence. Every legal citation was exact. She laid out the timeline, my purchase of the property, Claudia's first confrontation, the sheriff's visit, the cease and desist letter, social media harassment, the emergency meeting. The midnight trespassing was captured on camera, and running through it all like a thread was the land patent, the constitutional authority that made everything Claudia had done not just wrong but illegal at the federal level. By evening, we had a 40-page complaint ready to file. Lenora read through it one last time, then looked at me. "Once we file this, there's no going back. This becomes a public record. Claudia will know exactly what we have, and she's going to come at us with everything she's got. Her attorney will try to drag this out, bury us in motions, make it as expensive and painful as possible. Are you ready for that? I thought about Nora, about the promise I'd made, about the house on the mountain and the 150 years of history it represented, about the 7 families who'd been forced off their land by Claudia's schemes, about the lies and the threats and the midnight conspiracies. I'm ready, I said. Lenora nodded. Good, because tomorrow morning we're going to war. That night, I drove back up to the mountain. The house looked different now. The windows I'd replaced caught the last light of the sunset. The roof no longer sagged. The porch steps were solid under my feet. I walked inside and stood in the main room looking at the Douglas fir beams overhead, the same beams that had been here when Jasper Dalton built this place in 1875, the same beams that had sheltered him through winters and summers and decades of mountain weather. I pulled out my phone and called Lenora. I've been thinking, I said, about why this matters. It's not just about me keeping the house. It's about proving that the law actually means something, that you can't just bully people off their land because you have power and they don't. That truth is stronger than intimidation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Lenora said, "That's exactly why we're doing this, Owen. That's exactly why we're going to win." I hung up and stood there in the growing darkness, feeling the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow we'd file the lawsuit. Tomorrow Claudia Pemberton would discover that her 12 years of unchallenged authority were over. Tomorrow, the truth would finally have its day. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The HOA called another emergency meeting 2 weeks after we filed the federal lawsuit. This time, the notice was different. Special session property dispute resolution and board response. The tone was more cautious, more defensive. Lenora and I arrived together, and this time we weren't alone. A local journalist had gotten wind of the case. He'd reached out to me 3 days earlier asking questions about land patents and HOA overreach. His name was on his press badge. He set up a camera in the back of the room and started a live stream. The community center was packed, twice as many people as the last meeting. Word had spread. I recognized faces from the social media group. I also recognized some of the previous property owners Lenora had interviewed. They'd come to watch. Claudia sat at the front table, but she looked different. The confidence was gone. She kept glancing at her attorney who sat beside her, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with anyone. The other board members looked uncomfortable. One of them kept checking his phone like he wanted to be anywhere else. At 7 p.m., Claudia called the meeting to order. Her voice was tight. "Thank you for coming. As many of you know, the HOA has been named in a lawsuit filed by Mr. Fairchild. We want to address the allegations and set the record straight." She pulled up a presentation. The first slide read facts versus fiction. But before she could continue, the older woman from the last meeting stood up, the one who had helped me. She didn't wait to be called on. "Before you start, Claudia, I have a question. Why did you tell this community that Owen Fairchild's property was part of the HOA when you knew it wasn't?" The room went silent. Claudia's face flushed. "Mrs. Ashford, that's a mischaracterization. Is it?" The woman pulled out a document. "This is the original HOA charter from 1998. I was on the founding board. I have my own signed copy. That property on Mountain View Access Road is specifically listed as external to HOA jurisdiction. You knew that. So why did you lie?" Claudia's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She shook her head, then turned back to the room. "The boundaries were always intended to include, 'Show us the documentation,'" someone else called out. A man in the third row. "If the boundaries were changed, there should be meeting minutes, board votes, legal filings. Show us." Claudia fumbled with her laptop, pulled up a document. "This is the amended charter from 2005. "That's not real," Mrs. Ashford said flatly. "I've seen the county records. No amended charter was ever filed. What you're showing us is a fabrication." The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding answers. Claudia tried to speak over the noise, but couldn't. Her attorney stood up. "Everyone please, this is not the appropriate venue for these accusations. The matter is in litigation and will be resolved through proper legal channels." "We deserve answers now," someone shouted. "How many other properties have you done this to?" That's when I stood up. The room quieted slightly. I walked to the front, and Claudia's attorney moved like he might try to stop me, but Lenora was already on her feet. Mr. Fairchild has a right to address accusations made against him in a public forum, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 4 decades of legal practice. I reached the front and pulled out my laptop, connected it to the projector. I'm going to show you some things, I said, and then you can decide for yourselves what's true and what's not. The first slide was the land patent, the original document from 1875. This is a federal land grant. It was issued to Jasper Dalton by the United States government. Under federal law, this creates a paramount title. That means it supersedes any local jurisdiction, any covenant, any HOA rule. The HOA has never had authority over my land. Not in 1998, not now, not ever. I clicked to the next slide, a certified letter from the Bureau of Land Management. This is confirmation from the federal government that the land patent is valid, active, and legally binding. It was issued 3 weeks ago. Click. Next slide. The security camera footage. Date stamped. 2 a.m. 2 figures moving across my property with flashlights. This is Claudia Pemberton and Russell Kingsley, a real estate developer, trespassing on my land at 2 in the morning. Let me play the audio. I unmuted the video. Russell's voice came through the speakers. The survey confirms it. There's a gemstone deposit running directly under this section. Preliminary assessment puts it at $3 million, maybe more. The room was dead silent. Everyone was staring at the screen. Claudia's voice came next. And he has no idea, Russell laughed. He bought it for $5. He thinks it's just an old house. The video continued. Their discussion about forcing me out, about clearing the title, about Russell's development company moving in once I was gone. When it ended, the silence was absolute. I clicked to the next slide, a chart showing 7 properties in the Maplewood Heights area. These are properties that were purchased through foreclosure or forced sale over the past 5 years, all of them after the HOA filed violations against the owners. All of them were sold to Kingsley Development Corporation within 6 months. I looked directly at Claudia. This isn't about community standards. This isn't about protecting property values. This is about money. $3 million in gemstones under my land. And who knows how much from the other properties you've forced people off of. Claudia stood up at her chair, scraping against the floor. This is slander. You're manipulating evidence. The footage is time-stamped and certified, Lenora said, standing. We have the original files with metadata intact. We have testimony from multiple previous victims. We have financial records showing payments from Kingsley Development to an LLC registered in your name. This isn't slander, Ms. Pemberton. This is evidence. The room exploded again, but this time the anger wasn't directed at me. People were standing shouting at Claudia, demanding she resign, calling her a fraud. One of the board members stood up and walked out, shaking his head. Another followed. Claudia's attorney grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door without a word. Claudia stood there, her face pale, her hands shaking. She looked around the room like she was searching for allies, found none. "This meeting is adjourned," she said, her voice barely audible. Then she grabbed her things and walked out. The crowd parted like water, nobody wanting to stand near her. I watched her leave, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfied, just exhaustion. Mrs. Ashford came up to me, put her hand on my arm. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for having the courage to do what the rest of us couldn't." The journalist approached next. "Mr. Fairchild, can I ask you a few questions for my article?" I nodded. We did a short interview. I kept it factual. We talked about the land patent, the federal protection, the pattern of harassment. When he asked me what I wanted people to take away from this, I thought about Nora, about Jasper Dalton, about the 150 years that house had stood on that mountain. "I want people to understand that the law matters," I said. "Those documents matter. That truth matters. And that when someone with power tries to take what's yours, you don't have to just accept it. You can fight back. And sometimes, if you have the evidence and the law on your side, you can win." The journalist thanked me and left to file his story. Lenora and I walked out into the parking lot. The night air was cool. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the stars. "What happens now?" I asked. Lenora smiled. "Now we wait. The lawsuit is filed. The evidence is public. And tomorrow morning I'm betting the sheriff gets a very interesting phone call." Lenora was right. The next morning the FBI showed up at Claudia's house. Federal agents had gotten involved because the case crossed state lines and involved potential wire fraud. The security footage showing conspiracy to deprive property rights under color of law had triggered an investigation beyond local jurisdiction. They executed search warrants on Claudia's home, her HOA office, and Russell Kingsley's development company headquarters. What they found was worse than any of us had imagined. Claudia had kept meticulous records, emails detailing the schemes, spreadsheets tracking properties and payouts, contracts with Russell outlining profit sharing. She'd been running this operation for 7 years, 47 properties total, 47 families pressured off their land through fabricated violations and legal threats. The total value of the fraud was $8.3 million. Claudia's cut was $1.24 million. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page. HOA, president arrested in multi-million-dollar land fraud scheme. By noon, it had been picked up by state media. By evening, it was trending on social media. The same platforms that had been used to attack me were now flooded with people demanding justice. Russell Kingsley was arrested the same day. His attorney released a statement claiming he'd been unaware of Claudia's methods. That lasted exactly 48 hours until the FBI released emails showing Russell explicitly discussing how to manufacture code violations to force property owners into selling. Claudia's attorney withdrew from her case. The HOA board held an emergency session and voted unanimously to remove Claudia as president. 2 board members who'd been present at the meetings where properties were discussed also resigned under pressure. 6 weeks later, the federal trial began. I sat in the courtroom gallery with Lenora on one side and Mrs. Ashford on the other. The room was packed. Claudia sat at the defense table with a public defender who looked overwhelmed. She'd refused a plea deal, claimed she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd been protecting the community. The prosecution was methodical. They presented the land patent first, established its validity and my legal ownership beyond any doubt. Then they showed the security footage. The jury watched Claudia and Russell discussing the gemstone deposit, the plan to force me out at the profit they'd split. Then came the financial records. Bank transfers from Russell's company to an LLC Claudia had registered under a relative's name. $1.24 million over 7 years. Payments that coincided exactly with property transfers. The prosecution brought in 4 previous victims. Each one told the same story. Sudden HOA violations, escalating fines, threats of lawsuits, pressure until they couldn't afford to fight anymore. One woman broke down describing how she'd lost her grandmother's homestead land that had been in her family for 3 generations. The defense tried to argue that Claudia had genuinely believed the properties were under HOA jurisdiction. But then the prosecution presented the original HOA charter. It clearly excluded multiple properties. And they presented emails showing Claudia had known. One message to Russell from 3 years ago said, "The Harrison property isn't technically in our jurisdiction, but if we push hard enough, they won't know the difference." That email destroyed any claim of good faith. The trial lasted 8 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They came back with guilty verdicts on all counts: fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, trespass, witness intimidation. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. When sentencing day came, the courtroom was packed again. The judge was a woman in her 60s who'd spent 20 years on the federal bench. She looked at Claudia with something close to disgust. "Ms. Pemberton, you held a position of trust in your community. People relied on you to act in their best interests. Instead, you exploited that trust for personal gain. You manufactured legal threats to terrorize families off their property. You conspired with a developer to enrich yourself at others' expense." The judge paused. "The court finds that your actions were calculated, systematic, and caused substantial harm to multiple victims over an extended period. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison on the fraud charges, 3 years on the civil rights violations to run concurrently, 2 years on conspiracy charges also concurrent. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $2.7 million in restitution to your victims, including $350,000 to Mr. Fairchild. All assets obtained through this scheme are subject to forfeiture." Claudia showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead as the marshals led her away in handcuffs. Russell Kingsley was sentenced an hour later, 7 years in federal prison, $5 million in fines. His development company was dissolved. The HOA held elections the following month. Mrs. Ashford was voted in as the new president. Her first act was to pass new bylaws requiring financial transparency term limits and independent audits. The second act was a formal apology to me and the other victims. One by one, neighbors who'd glared at me started coming by the house, apologizing, offering to help with the restoration. A group of them showed up one Saturday with tools and spent the day helping me replace the porch railings. I stood outside the courthouse after the sentencing with Lenora beside me. The journalist approached for a final interview. "Mr. Fairchild, how do you feel now that it's over?" I thought about the 7 months since I'd bought that house for $5, about Nora and the promise I'd made, about the 47 families who had finally gotten justice. I don't think justice is about revenge. It's about restoration. Today wasn't about punishing her. It was about proving that the system still works if you're willing to fight for it. That truth and evidence matter more than power and intimidation. The journalist thanked me and left. Lenora put her hand on my shoulder. "Nora would have been proud," she said quietly. I nodded, couldn't speak for a moment. Then I said, "Let's go home. I have a house to finish." 8 months after the trial, I stood on the newly rebuilt porch and looked at what the house had become. The restoration was complete. Every window had been replaced with period-appropriate glass. The roof was solid, covered in cedar shakes that matched the original design. The Douglas fir beams inside had been cleaned and treated their natural amber color glowing in the morning light. The stone fireplace had been repointed, every granite block sitting exactly as it had when Jasper Dalton laid them in 1875. I'd added a small plaque near the front door. Dalton Fairchild House, Est, 1875. Restored 2025. 3 weeks earlier, the house had been officially listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The designation meant it would be protected, forever preserved as a piece of American history that had survived a century and a half of weather neglect and one very determined HOA president. Today was the opening. 200 people had been invited. The community, the previous victims of Claudia's schemes, Lenora, the journalist who had helped expose the fraud, Sheriff Merrick, even the federal judge who'd sentenced Claudia had sent a congratulatory letter. I watched them arrive, parking along the access road and walking up the newly graveled path. Mrs. Ashford was the first to reach the porch. She carried a bottle of wine with a ribbon around it. "For the celebration," she said, smiling, "and for everything you did." She'd brought the original HOA charter with her framed. "I thought you might want this, as a reminder that documents matter, that history matters." I took it, feeling the weight of it. "Thank you for everything. If you hadn't stood up that night," she waved a hand, "you would have found another way. People like you always do." She went inside to look at the restoration work, and I greeted the others as they arrived. By noon, the house was full. People moved through the rooms, admiring the craftsmanship, asking questions about the restoration process. I'd set up a small exhibit in what used to be the root cellar, photos of the house when I first bought it, the land patent in a climate-controlled display case, excerpts from Jasper Dalton's journal that I'd found and carefully preserved, a timeline showing the house's history from 1875 to today, and in a place of honor, a photo of Nora. She was standing in front of a different historic building, the one from the last project she'd worked on before she got sick. She was smiling, holding a set of architectural plans, her eyes bright with the enthusiasm she brought to everything she loved. I'd written a small caption beneath it, "For Nora, who taught me that old things deserve to live again." People stopped at that photo. Some of them knew the story. Others asked, and I told them about the promise, about the dream of a mountain house where morning light came through old timber and made everything glow like amber, about how this place had given me a reason to keep going when I didn't think I had one. Lenora found me in the main room as the afternoon light started to slant through the western windows. "You did it," she said simply. "You kept your promise." I looked around at the house, at the people filling it with conversation and life, at the way the sunlight hit the floor in the exact pattern Nora had described. "We did it," I said. "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled. "That's what friends are for. That's what the law is for, to protect people who are trying to do the right thing." She handed me an envelope. "This came yesterday. I wanted to give it to you in person." I opened it. It was a check. The restitution payment from Claudia's forfeited assets. $350,000. I stared at it, not quite believing it was real. What will you do with it? Lenora asked. I thought about it, about the 46 other families who'd been victims, about the cost of fighting back against people with power and money. I'm going to set up a fund for people dealing with HOA overreach or property fraud, legal defense fund, free consultations, expert witnesses, whatever they need to fight back. Nobody should have to face what I faced alone. Lenora's eyes got bright. She nodded. I'll help you set it up, pro bono, and I know other attorneys who will too. That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, I walked through the rooms one last time. The smell of pine was still there, but now it mixed with the scent of fresh wood oil and the faint trace of the wine that had been opened for toasts. I stood in front of the fireplace and opened Jasper Dalton's journal to the last entry he had written, April 1891. This house has stood for 16 years. I built it with my hands, and it has sheltered me through every season. When I am gone, I hope it stands for someone else. I hope they see what I saw, that a home is not just wood and stone. It is a promise to the future that something good can last. I took out a pen and added my own entry below his dated 25. This house has stood for 150 years. It has survived time, weather, and those who wanted to tear it down for profit. Today it stands as proof that truth is stronger than power, that the law protects those who stand up for it, and that some promises are worth keeping no matter the cost. I closed the journal and placed it back in its protective case. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The same light that had drawn me here, the same light that Nora had dreamed about. I sat on the porch steps and pulled out my phone, took one last photo of the house in the evening glow. Then I sent it to Lenora with a message. Home. Her response came back immediately. Perfect. I sat there as the stars came out, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The house wasn't just restored, it was alive again. And so was I.
From all of us here at QA Stories, thank you for watching. Smash that like button, drop a comment, and join us again for more unbelievable stories.